the primary agenda today is to awaken Americans to the fact that we're in a competition again. And not many people here know that. And so I think that's the focus of what Ben's going to talk about, and talk about how we compete. But in the superpower competition, the Russians and the Chinese operate with military, political, and investment all under the roof of the government. And America competes, we don't do it that way. Our government handles the military and the political, but the private investment is our job. I think we have a philosophy and a set of values is that we can allocate capital better than our government. And, but it means people like Ben and I got to work together. When I graduated from the Harvard Business School in 1989, at the Baker Scholar dinner, George Baker IV said, "Your capital will shape the future of the world." And I had no idea what he meant at that time. But looking back at it, the industry that I was in, which is private equity, has shaped the future of the world since 1989. When I graduated in 1999, the total amount of private equity funds in the United States was less than $200 billion. Today, it's $4 trillion. That is the pool of capital that's driven the digital revolution across the globe. The effect of that has dropped the global poverty rate from 44 to 8%. Extreme poverty rate around the world in the last 30 years has gone from 44 to 8%. And that revolution has created huge efficiencies, which has driven our stock market from 700 to 25,000. So this pool of private capital, it's different than corporate money. Procter & Gamble and GE can't invest too far from jet engines and consumer goods. But with this $4 trillion that we have, we can invest it anywhere we want. I think private equity is our secret weapon in these countries in Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe. And we'll talk why they're so important in a minute, because what we can do with private equity capital is something the Russians and the Chinese can't, which is we can invest in quality of life. We can dignify human beings in the way we build communities, the way we build schools, and the way we deliver healthcare. Our competing ideologies don't believe in empowering people, building better lives. And so I think, as I look back on this line from my graduation, your capital will shape the future of the world. I hope our capital shapes the future of the world. In terms of the thing that investors think about Romania, Romania is the most pro-American country in the European Union by a lot. 84% of Romanians are pro-American. In terms of security, Romania is not only a critical NATO member, but it has the lowest violent crime rate in the European Union. People always ask me, is it safe? Yeah, it's very safe. In terms of economic growth, the city that our projects are in has doubled in population in the last 10 years, is planning to double again, and has a growth rate of in excess of 10% a year. And lastly, the group of people who've gotten involved with it, and I mentioned some of them, who've invested, include 14 CEOs, a number of whom have been over more than 20 times. So these things that we're doing in Romania have really left us with a really experienced team. And lastly, I got a picture of my grandpa here. 1989 was a big year for me. That's when I graduated from Harvard. And I had this crazy idea is that my capital would shape the future of the world. It was also when my grandpa told me he was glad I didn't join the ROTC. This was after the wall came down. And he said, the military clears the path for freedom. The government makes the rules and the institutions. But it's your capital that makes it work, that builds a substantially higher quality of life. And one of the reasons I like to put this in here isn't to talk about my grandpa, but the only reason that history repeats itself is because we forget. We forget in 1948 and 1949, we decided it'd be a whole lot less expensive in terms of lives and money if we prevented war in Europe rather than join the losing side 2 to 3 years into the war. So we did 3 things. On the political side, we rewrote the German Constitution with the Germans. We decentralized things in the lender like we have here in the United States, and we wrote into the Constitution as checks and balance, a separation of powers in the national government. The second thing we did is we invested with the Marshall Plan. And the third thing we did is we set up NATO. And we've now had 73 years of peace in Europe, which is amazing. It's amazing. 73 years without a significant war in Europe. But now I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and it's always an honor. 37 years in the Army, Afghanistan, Iraq, and welcome. Thanks for coming.
So I assume that y'all are all here for the same reason I am. Don did not give me a choice, and I suspect that he didn't give you a choice either. Sitting next to him is like hooking up to a city power plant, and so much energy that comes from it, and he got me fired up about this, about the role of investment. Obviously, I was an infantry soldier for 37 years. I went to a bank last December for the first time in 10 years, so I'm not here to talk to you about investment. I'm here to talk to you, though, about why Europe matters to the United States. So I'm from Tallahassee, Florida, North Florida. Graduated from the military academy in 1980. Was in the Army for about 37 years. I started my Army career in Germany, in northern Germany between Bremen and Bremerhaven. It was the only American unit up in the north. Some of you may recall that at one time we had almost 300,000 American soldiers in West Germany when Germany was still divided. And so and most of that was in Bavaria, central and southern Germany. And of course you had the Iron Curtain, and you had about 1 million Soviet troops on the other side, Warsaw Pact, on the other side of the inner German border, and in Czechoslovakia when that was still one country, and of course in Poland. And then you had a very large NATO force on the west. And the so-called Cold War, you had thousands of nuclear weapons, you had huge navies, air forces, and so on. But it was the determination of the United States and the West to stick together and protect West Germany, protect the interests that we cared about, the things that the alliance was created for, that Don referenced earlier. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was created after World War II. It was the Washington Treaty that created NATO. I was in the Army for 37 years, and none of my 3 sisters still know what NATO stands for. I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence, but people here in the U.S., we don't think of things the same way. And you may not be aware, and you could almost take it for granted, but I'm going to use today to help provide some of that insight and to explain why I think it still matters. So I started off in Germany, and I ended up finishing up in Europe. My last 6 years, I started in 2012 to 2014. I was in Izmir, Turkey. It's a NATO headquarters there, NATO Land Command. And it was a new headquarters, and it was very small because at the end of the Cold War, we all thought that Russia was going to be our partner. That's what everybody wanted. Some of you can remember there was huge investments going into Russia, a lot of business opportunities, and we really thought that this was how it was going to be. And so all of us, including the United States, dramatically disarmed. We went from 300,000 troops down to about 30,000 troops in Europe. That's about half of what could sit in your football stadium here. That's how many American soldiers are in Europe. And so the Navy had one ship. U.S. Navy Europe had one ship. That was it, there in the Mediterranean. The great Air Force, other than Ramstein Air Base, had just got a lot smaller. The U.S. was focused on Afghanistan and Iraq. We're starting to worry a little bit about China, and of course, we've always been worried about North Korea. They have nuclear weapons. But Europe was a place we thought was going to be stable. We even had Russian troops with us when we went into Bosnia. After the Dayton Peace Accords, you remember in 1995, the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement, and then NATO went into Bosnia to separate the Serbs, the Croatians, and the Bosnians to implement that peace agreement. We had Russian troops with us. So there was a possibility of this happening. But then in 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea, seized and illegally annexed Crimea, that changed everything for us. I'm going to point out a few things that I didn't know until 4 years ago when I started looking at the map and understanding the geography. So we talk about Crimea, that's right here. Crimea, of course, is a part of its sovereign territory of Ukraine. The Russians agreed to that. It was given from the Soviet government. It was made a part of Ukraine back in the 50s. So this is not a new thing. And every now and then you'll hear Russia talk about, well, we had to bring it back because this has always been Russian territory. It's just not true. And part of what it is we're trying to do is create resilient societies that can resist misinformation. That's an important part of it. Having a media that is free and able to investigate and report is a part of a resilient society, not just military. So Crimea is right here. And of course, this other shaded part, this is what's called the Donbass, in eastern Ukraine, which is Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, if you will, of Ukraine. That's where the so-called separatists, Russian-led separatists, have been fighting now since about 2014. So the two shaded areas of Ukraine that you see are occupied by Russian troops. And then the thing that you just heard about that happened here the other day, where you had Russian ships, Russian Navy, attack 3 Ukrainian vessels just outside the Sea of Azov. Now, again, to show you how much I've had to learn in the last few years, I didn't know where the Sea of Azov was. I mean, I've just looked at the map 1,000 times, but I never paid any attention to it or thought that it mattered. But it actually matters a lot. The Sea of Azov is this part right here. And there's a strait through here called the Kerch Straits. And then, of course, then you're in the Black Sea. And the Russians, since they occupied Crimea, have built a massive bridge that connects Russia to Crimea. Now, just so happens that that bridge is at a height that would prevent any of the large ships that would normally sail up into the Sea of Azov to the port of Mariupol, which is the principal steel exporting city for Ukraine, so in a very important part of their economy. Those ships can no longer pass through the Kerch Strait because of the height of the bridge. That was not a design flaw by the engineer that designed the bridge. Obviously, this was intentional by the Russians to dry up Ukraine's economy. This is what they're attempting to do. Now, there was an agreement between Russia and Ukraine that Sea of Azov would be treated as an internal body of water between the two of them, so that technically a Ukrainian Navy ship could sail right up to the coastline of Russia and vice versa, unlike international waters where, you know, there's typically a 12-mile sort of zone. But since the Russians built the bridge, they have begun to stop all the Ukrainian ships coming in and out of the Sea of Azov. And then, of course, they opened fire the other day and then rammed a ship. You probably saw that on the news. It showed quite a bit. Now, why did I go right into detail on the Sea of Azov and the Kerch Strait? Because it's a symptom of what this great power competition is all about. And I'll explain why the Russians are doing it there. Of course, watched how well the United States performed during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. They see the U.S. Navy, the world's greatest Navy. They see that we have 11, 12 aircraft carriers, capabilities that are global. China is never going to try and match that. They don't want to match that. Russia does not have that kind of a Navy. They don't want to match that. But what both of them have decided to do is they want to change this global order where the United States, NATO, European Union have the advantage. And so they're looking for everything they can to change the power structures in the world so that they would have the economic advantage, the political advantage, the diplomatic advantage. And so in order to do that, for example, China in the South China Sea, where you've got a lot of potential for oil and gas, and you've got all the critical trade routes. In fact, everybody in this room probably has something that was made in China or Japan. It would have sailed through the South China Sea to get to where you are, to get to Cincinnati. China has established their version of aircraft carriers on artificial islands out in the South China Sea. Now, these are illegal. They violate all the international laws about freedom of navigation. So, of course, our Navy, the world's greatest Navy, is going to continue to go out there and challenge the development of these artificial islands. I hope I'm wrong, but I believe that the potential for the United States and China to be in a military conflict in the next 10 to 12 years is very real. And the reason I think it's real is because I see nothing coming out of China today that gives me any sort of thought or hope that the current leadership of the Chinese Communist Party is looking for an off-ramp. In fact, I think the opposite. I think they are looking for a fight. I think they want to have a fight. When I'm an Army guy, but I know that the skipper of a ship would never go out and ram or almost ram another ship or come within 50 meters unless he had very specific instructions to do that or had been given the authority to do that. And that's exactly what this Chinese ship did, came out and challenged us. We've had Chinese aircraft force down an American reconnaissance aircraft a few years ago. This One Belt, One Road initiative with all the infrastructure that they're investing in around the world, particularly in this area here and in Africa, and where we're competing in Central and Eastern Europe, is designed to create dependencies and advantages for them, access for them. Right now, China owns about 10% of the seaports in Europe. And those seaports are essential for us, for the alliance, if we were going to have to respond to a crisis with Russia, to be able to deter Russia or to respond to failed deterrence. We're going to be using seaports that are controlled by the Chinese. Now, this is kind of a dire description of what I think is happening from the Chinese side. And so why do you hear, and I'm showing a map of Europe and I'm talking about China. The United States does not have the capability, the capacity to do what we used to do, which was what we call 2.5 wars. Russia, China, and the half war would be something like in Afghanistan or South America, where you had enough capacity to do both. I mean, you had to have the Navy, Air Force, land forces, special forces, intelligence structures to do all that. We don't have that same capacity anymore. And so we need our European allies to stand up. That's why the administration is pressing our European allies to do more, to have this strong European pillar that could continue to deter Russia if the United States has to engage in a military conflict with China. Now, I do have friends and Europeans will say, why would Russia ever attack the West? I mean, it makes no sense. You look at the combined populations of the 29 nations of NATO, the combined militaries, the combined economies, and then you look at Russia, it makes no sense. Why in the world would they do it? And I think that's a fair question. I mean, why in the world would they do it? Remember, and you could challenge me on this, but Russia's objective is to see NATO come apart, to see the European Union come apart. How do you make NATO come apart? How do you attack the cohesion of the alliance, the most successful alliance in the history of the world? 71 years since the creation of NATO, and all these countries that have been chewing each other up for the last 2,000 years have not been fighting each other. In fact, they've all been, they've achieved a level of prosperity that was unimaginable even in 1945. So the Russians attack that cohesion continuously through misinformation, through pouring money into far left, far right, whatever it is, to cause them to lose confidence in each other and to put doubt in the minds of allies that the rest of the alliance would actually come to their rescue, to live up to Article 5, which says an armed attack on one is an attack on all. So in order to unhinge the alliance, you don't have to have a gigantic military. Unlike when Lieutenant Hodges was here in northern Germany and we thought this big giant red arrow was going to come all the way across, which in fact was their plan. Now they just have to demonstrate that that NATO cannot protect one of its members. So now you talk about a very short, quick, sharp attack combining cyber, civil disturbances, kinetic, and then does the alliance respond? Can the alliance respond? There's a reason that the Russians use nuclear weapons in all their exercises. They always talk about nuclear weapons. And I'm not talking about idiots in their mother's basement. I'm talking about ambassadors, government officials saying, Denmark, if you join any missile defense system with NATO in the Baltic Sea, for example, you will become a nuclear target. Sweden, if you join any missile defense system, you will become a nuclear target. So this is to put in the minds of political leaders, oh shit, they might actually use a nuclear weapon. Do I really want to get into a war up here that might involve nuclear weapons? So that's the Russian approach. And I do believe that they only respect strength. So the alliance has responded very well since the attack into Crimea with the previous 3 summits, the Wales Summit in 2014, the Warsaw Summit in 2016, and then the Brussels Summit in 2018, where the alliance has responded by modernizing, by increasing capabilities, air, land, and sea, special forces, cyber, all these things, and sticking together to convey to the Russians that, you know, we are going to protect all of our allies. And the United States has been obviously a critical part of this. In 2016, at the NATO summit in Warsaw, when the alliance said, okay, we've got to do more, the alliance decided to create EFP, Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Groups. So multinational formations in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and in Poland. The United States is the lead nation for this battle group in Northeast Poland. The Germans are the lead nation in Lithuania. This was very important. The Germans were the first nation to step forward and say, we will lead a battle group and we'll deploy to Lithuania. And then they were the first to deploy in less than a year. And this put pressure on all the other Europeans, because if they think if the Germans don't do it, then we don't have to do it. But when the Germans did do it, that put pressure on the French, the Italians, and everyone else. Canada is back on the continent of Europe. They're the lead nation in Latvia, and then UK, Great Britain, is the lead nation in Estonia with these battle groups. So this was an important part of the alliance returning to a deterrence posture. So here we are now in the Black Sea. I believe that the Russians value the Black Sea even more than the Baltic Sea. This is traditionally from where they have always tried to get a warm water port, because you're either up here or you go out here in the far east of Vladivostok, and they don't have access to the oceans the way the United States does, obviously, or several other European countries. The Black Sea is what allows them to influence the Caucasus, the Middle East, Eastern Mediterranean, and in Africa. Everything that they're doing in Syria, for example, supporting the Assad regime, it all comes out of here. The Black Sea Fleet is based in Sevastopol. They come out of the Black Sea through the Bosphorus Straits and then the Dardanelles into the Aegean and then into the Mediterranean. So this is essential for them. I think that Romania is the key to the Black Sea for NATO because of its geography, and also because Turkey has been a great ally since 1952, but right now we're in a bad place with them. We can't count on Turkey to be able to lead in the Black Sea region. There is something called the Montreux Convention, which is from 1936. This was part of the agreement at the end of the First World War and the creation of a new Turkish republic, that Turkey would retain control over those straits, the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles, and that only nations who are littoral, Black Sea littoral nations, i.e. Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey and Georgia, could maintain navies on the Black Sea. So the United States cannot maintain a navy there. We can have ships of a certain category go up in there for 21 days at a time, but then they have to leave. So that makes it a little bit of a challenge to have a strong, consistent maritime presence to counter the Russians in the Black Sea. It is so important for the alliance because it's the only country, I believe, that's going to be able to help counter Russian aggression in the Black Sea. Now, that doesn't mean that there's going to be a war in Romania, far from it. But as you watch what Russia is trying to do in the Black Sea to completely dominate it, Romania sits in a place where We've got about 1,000 American soldiers currently stationed near the city of Constanta, which is the second largest seaport on the Black Sea. We've also established something called Aegis Ashore, which is a missile defense system that was put there to stop missiles coming out of Iran into Europe. This is something the United States agreed to do a few years ago, have it in Romania and Poland to protect Europeans from missiles coming out of Iran. So that's part of our commitment to Romania. That's how important it is to us. And then, right here in Constanta, this is the mouth of the Danube River. Now, when I always thought of the Danube River, I think of the Waltz, and you think of tour boats and so on, but actually, the economies of 8 different European countries are affected by the Danube River. The Danube River starts here in Bavaria and then works its way through Austria, past Vienna, past Budapest, and it comes down through Belgrade, and then it runs along the border between Romania and Bulgaria, and then right at the last minute turns up north and empties out here. So the potential, and when you ask Romanians, hey, so how important is the Danube to you? And you get a sense that they haven't really developed the potential that the Danube offers. In Europe, the rivers are more important than highways or railroads for moving large bulk produce. On the Rhine River, which also starts down in southern Germany and then works its way up through the Netherlands out into the North Sea, it looks like an interstate out there. There are so many barges going up and down the river. The Danube, probably less than 10% of that. So what I'm saying is, for the Black Sea region, which is so important to the Russians, for the West, Romania is the key country because of the Danube, because of its geography where it sits, and because of an absence of capability from other allies, which is why the U.S. military has put so much emphasis into Romania. This base near the port of Constanta, we've done exercises there, we've put missile defense there, and the Romanians, who are exceptionally reliable allies, they're 2%ers. In other words, in terms of their own investment into defense, they're modernizing. They've just bought a U.S. Patriot missile defense system. They're buying another artillery system that's American. They're working as fast as they can to distance themselves from old Warsaw Pact, Soviet-type equipment. And when President Obama increased the number of troops in Afghanistan, there were only 2 other countries that increased along with us: Great Britain and Romania. They doubled their commitment. So this is a country that is committed to doing its part inside the alliance as well, both in terms of where they put their soldiers and in their modernization effort. What's missing, in fact, what's missing in much of this part of Europe is the resilient sort of society, the institutions that's needed to help them resist this constant Russian pressure. Extremely intelligent young people, very well educated, very connected, but so many of them are, because they don't see the future there, they go to Germany, they go to UK, or they go elsewhere. And so from a United States strategic perspective, obviously what we want to see is young Romanians choosing to stay at home. Poles stay at home. Ukrainians stay at home and develop the sort of resilient institutions that are necessary in tandem with military to resist Russian pressure. That's why Romania matters to the United States. That's why it matters to the alliance.